Our speaker tonight represents a country which, as Walter Winchell used to say in an earlier day, is in a very interesting condition. Ukraine is a very old, very proud, very independent country, home of some of the finest troops that Russia has ever produced, the Cossacks. And yet for 300 years and longer, they've been under one imperial thumb or another. The Lithuanians, the Poles, the Russians, the Germans. Within the last 2 years, they've managed to escape that thumb. They are now totally independent. They have come out with the largest standing army in Europe, which is not generally known. They have embassies around the world, and they've accomplished all this without firing a shot. Well, I think one of the clever things that they did, and the way they did it without firing a shot, was that they kept their own nuclear weapons out of the hands of Moscow. Our speaker is a rather famous economist. Let me just tell you a little about him. He was a dean and the vice president of the Kiev Institute of National Economy from 1962 to 1979, visiting researcher at Columbia and Harvard, 74 to 75. He was director of the Industry and Technology Division of the UN Secretariat in Geneva from 79 until 86. He's written a number of books, a number of papers. He became ambassador to the United States early this year. So with great pleasure, I give you the ambassador of the Ukraine, who will speak on Ukraine, the struggle for democracy and proper world role, Dr. Oleh H. Bilorus. Welcome to Baltimore.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, I am not ready in Hochdeutsch. I would prefer to speak to you in absolutely common language, that is human language, language of friendship, language of partnership, language of cooperation, and language of joint work here in the United States and in my country. Job to be done at the end of this stormy 20th century, which was dramatic and tragic for my country, and which is with some, I do believe, with some great happy end for Ukraine and for Ukrainian people. We do believe that from 91, by democratic voting, Ukrainian people, all nations of Ukraine, all citizens of Ukraine have decided their historic destiny in form of independent country, independent state, and what is most important, democratic society in Ukraine. Ukraine was terra incognita for about 200 years for other nations, other countries, and other states. Ukraine was turned to be very attractive and very important part of several empires, including the most despotic empire of former Soviet Union. And Ukraine suffered too much during the last 20th century. To give you an impression on that, I could start from the civil war. In civil war, Ukraine has lost as minimum 5 million people. In the process of forced collectivization, more than 12 millions people. During the industrialization and repressions, Stalinist repressions before the Second World War, more than 7 million people. During the Second World War, losses of Ukraine are enormous, more than 5 to 7 million people. And the question was and is how this country could survive, how it was possible for such a country to develop itself, economically speaking, politically speaking, culturally, and from the point of view of social and humanitarian things. Ukraine is a big European country, and the main secret of Ukraine is that it's not a new country, new democracy, new state. The people considering that Ukraine is new emerging country and a new emerging state, they are mistaken. Ukraine is very old country, very old civilization, very old culture, and with very old roots in European soil, and maybe that European genotype in economic terms, in political terms, in social cultural terms, is the real answer on the question how it was possible for Ukraine to survive under oppression of very many powerful empires, to survive in absolutely unacceptable external and internal conditions. Ukraine emerged in the today's European scene and world scene as a very big, very strong country with big potentialities and with very promising destiny. Ukraine is ready to work together and to be the very serious contributor to the success of humankind. Ukraine was able to produce the most important political miracle of 20th century. And that responsibility and that result produced by Ukraine is clear. Ukraine is, in quotation, responsible for collapse and destroyment of last and biggest world empire, Soviet Union, by democratic voting in favor of its independent status as a free nation and free independent state. Ukrainian nation and all people living in Ukraine helped much to other nations, other countries, republics of the former Soviet Union to become free and independent. Ukraine helped even Russia to be big independent country, to be democratic society. And it's not a secret at all that the real factor of stabilization in Eastern and Central Europe, the real locomotive for democratization of new societies in Eastern Europe, in Central Europe, is Ukraine, as the biggest and leading European country. But at the same time, we have so many bad consequences of Ukrainian existence as a part of that empire we mentioned. We have so big accumulation of problems that we could say immediately that Ukraine now is in deep economic and social crisis. And some colleagues and friends reading that fact that Ukraine, as well as Russia and other republics and countries, parts of the former Soviet Union, are in crisis, they are very pessimistic. They say that, well, it is even worse than it was during the Soviet Union existence. My answer to that is absolutely optimistic. We should move through very difficult, very complicated situation of so-called transitional period. No one revolution was or could be easy walk. We should sacrifice even more in favor of our future. And my people, they are ready to sacrifice, to contribute, to invest all their efforts and over-efforts in favor of future democratic society and future prosperity of my country. My people working hard and living in very difficult social environment, and they are sure that in some 7 or 10 years the situation in Ukraine will be absolutely different, and we will discuss some different problems. We will discuss problems of overproduction. We will discuss problems of economic restructuring. We will discuss long-term environmental programs as the first priority and imperative. But for that, we should rejoin the civilized world. We should be integrated or reintegrated into European and world community. For that, we need to generate and to demonstrate one more miracle in my country. Such is its destiny. And that one more miracle is economic miracle. Economic miracle, because all things, all ideas, all moments in practically our future is depending directly from our economic development, from our economic growth. Being a professional economist, I know national economy very well. Seems to me I know its economic history, its economic system, its economic structure, and economic potentiality of my country. I know my people, and that's why I am absolutely optimistic. I am sure that hard work and international cooperation, good partnership with such a leading democratic countries as United States and other will help Ukraine not only to survive, not only to keep itself as a big European country, but to progress, to develop, and to raise the social and living standard. For that, I should repeat again and again, God bless America and God bless Ukraine, new Ukraine we have now. Speaking on the historic destiny of Ukraine at the end of 20th century, speaking on national doctrine of Ukraine, of state doctrine, of economic strategy and social strategy of Ukraine, from this point, from the perspectives of this country, we could see very many contradictions. On one hand, we have extremely rich country before us, country with deep historical roots, country with well-educated people, ready to work hard. And on the other hand, we see country with a very poor population. I could support this conclusion telling you that the average salaries and wages in my country now are about $15 per month. $15 per month. And again you could ask me one more question. How could you survive? What kind of secret economic weapon you have? Maybe you are feeding yourself with some Holy Spirit instead of good food in the American sense. And really we have some secrets. We have some secrets. And let's try to answer several questions. And those questions are interconnected in the system of economic, social, political, and humanitarian relations in my country. But before I answer those questions, I should start to describe a little bit my country, to describe it in the same paradoxical, contradictive data. Ukraine today, or Ukraine before the former Soviet Union collapse, was the country of 52 million of people. It's a very big European country. Its territory is bigger than territory of France. Beside Russia, Ukraine, according to its territory, is the biggest European country, because Russia is Eurasian country, having European part and Asiatic part. The Ukrainian territory was only 2.7% of the former Soviet Union territory, and Ukrainian population was about 20 less, about 17% of the former Soviet Union population. Nevertheless, Ukraine was able to produce about 20% of industrial output of the former Soviet Union and about 40% of agro-industrial output of the former Soviet Union. You could judge, you could estimate, you could see that the Ukrainian productivity was very many times higher than average. And Ukraine was paradoxically developed country. According to United Nations definitions and statistics, Ukraine is industrially overdeveloped country. It was included in so-called Group of 10. And that is not only because of absolute parameters, but per capita specific indicators. So again, you could ask me, in such a case, what kind of problems you have? You are a well-developed country, rich, very rich on natural resources. You have a big population, educated, you have very qualified labor force, you have huge scientific technical potential, you have huge industrial complex, and why you are in crisis now? The answer is very clear and very simple. Ukraine was the very important part of the former Soviet Union. It was practically so-called beating heart of former Soviet Union economic system and industrial system and so-called single national economic complex of the former Soviet Union. That's why Ukraine suffered first of all. And I could give you one more paradox. Being very well developed, the part of the Soviet Union, the most developed, at the same time, from the point of view of average annual salaries and wages per capita, was on 11th place in the former Soviet Union. Even something even more impressive. Per capita production on consumer goods in Ukraine is on 11 to 12 place in the former Soviet Union. And you could ask me again how it could happen. You have the industrial system, you have resources, you have labor force, but the secret, in quotation, is that Ukraine was turned in the huge military defense industrial complex of the former Soviet Union. It produced more tanks than tractors. It produced huge amount of aircrafts, military aircrafts, much more than civil aircrafts. It produced huge warships, rockets, all this arsenal of weaponry. And the national economy of Ukraine was overloaded from the point of view of military load. It was overloaded ecologically speaking, because that huge industrial complex with very heavy structures of steel industry, mining industry, heavy chemical industry, and so on and so. But the most important thing was that Ukraine never had so-called economic sovereignty on its national economy. The Ukrainian government was able to regulate and to keep under its direct command only 5% of the national economy turnover. That's why we said that we have 5% of economic autonomy. So practically, Ukraine as a country, as a society, had no its own national economy. For that, because of imperial interest of the former Soviet Union, the structure of national economy of Ukraine was developed in very special way. From the point of view of scale and level of food industry development, light industry development, infrastructure, housing, we were in the class of so-called developing countries. And because of that, we have very bad consequences, negative consequences in the sectors of agriculture. Ukraine was able to produce 50 million metric tons of grain per year. But losses of harvest traditionally were on the level of 30% because we had not enough processing capacities, not enough infrastructure, not enough distribution, not enough machinery or system which could ensure the best final consumption of that huge production. Economic system of Ukraine was ineffective even in terms of losses of human, let's say, human labor. We had so-called 100% of employment, but that was something artificial. Under that, we had overemployment or hidden unemployment. Taking all those negative factors together, we could conclude that the economic system of the former Soviet Union was destined to collapse by itself because of its internal objective evolution. Plus, you could add over militarization of all country. Again and again, when discussing this question with my colleagues and friends here, when meeting very brave statement that one country could be greeted because he defeated the former Soviet Union, I said, no. The former Soviet Union collapsed not because somebody destroyed it, military or economically. The former Soviet Union collapsed because of its internal development, evolution, accumulations of new effects, and it collapsed because historical change of societal formation from despotic societal organization on the huge continent and the last bastion of despotism in form of so-called socialism, which was practically social feudalism, to democracy which is unavoidable and which is the rule in one country or in one group of countries, and it should be the law of nature in practically all countries of this world. That's why I do believe that we are at very important historical crossroad. I do believe that history is working in our place now, and I do believe that the history of Ukraine is working not only on Ukrainian territory, but even here in the United States of America. That's why I'm very optimistic. I do believe that in spite of all difficulties, of all crises, my people, they will be able to, to reach the level you reached in your country. And we have all necessary preconditions for that, and let me discuss that. Let me discuss that trying to answer several questions. First of those questions is what kind of society we are trying to build in my country. After very many years and centuries of independent status, my country will construct new society based on well-known tradition and principles. For us, maybe more than for you, definition democracy is full of real and practical sense. For you who lived for centuries, for years and centuries in natural democratic society, the word democracy is some slight, let's say, aureole of inflation. You repeat it too often. In my country, this definition is full of new sense, and seems to me, when speaking on democracy, in my country, we should speak first of all on statehood. Statehood as the organization and as the guarantee for irreversible development of that democratic society. Now we have the national discussion in Ukraine on new Ukrainian constitution. And one of the biggest questions is what kind of state is acceptable for Ukraine? Some people say parliamentarian republic. Another group say presidential rule. Presidential republic is better. One more group could say American system is good. You could hear a French system is good. One say German system is good because they produced German economic miracle after the Second World War, and so up to Japanese system where they have fur and diet and very special system of national organization. I think we should answer those questions for us and for you, taking into account the national structure of Ukraine. I should repeat, even here, in spite of the fact that you know very well that my country was voting unanimously for independence. 90.1% of population of Ukraine voted for Ukraine independent on the December 1st, 1991. And they voted for the first Ukrainian president, Mr. Kravchuk, with qualified majority of 61.8%. The first figure, 90.1%, is unusual, not only because we used to vote 99.99% in my country during the period of socialism, but because that is the historic concord of all nations in my country in favor of independent state and democratic society. The real fact is that in Ukraine you have not only Ukrainians, you have 11 million of Russians in Ukraine. You have Belarusians, and my family name tells me that I'm the emigrant from Belarus to Ukraine in 33rd generation. You have Jewish people, you have Poles, you have Hungarians, Romanians, Bulgarians. We have 100 nations in Ukraine. And it seems to me that such a nice national structure of Ukraine is a very positive factor of its stability and stabilization. Look, we have wars, Yugoslavia, then Moldavia, then Armenia, Azerbaijan, Ossetia. Russia is in war now. Nothing of that in Ukraine. Nothing of that in spite of the fact that the societal tension was rather strong. The first Ukrainian president, Mr. Kravchuk, was able to become the real national leader, and I think he's very good for this transitional period. He's flexible, he's wise, and he's ready to compromise, to the biggest national compromise. He proposed to adopt the special act for great pacification, for integration of all forces and movements in my country in favor of new statehood, in favor of democracy. He proposed to unite all our efforts in favor of new state as a guarantee for new Ukraine's existence, because the question to be or not to be for Ukraine is still valid. That's why my people support him. And that's why I think that the real sense of intersocietal, let's say, competition, fight, we will be able to put on the level, on the highest level of intellectual competition for the best national doctrines, for best national strategies, and for the best concepts, how to resolve our problems. Ukraine, from the very beginning of the restoration of its state, Ukraine was able to declare that new Ukrainian state will be not only of national character, national state. We construct so-called civil state with the real power of law. And in that we are similar to United States. Some groups and movements in my country protested. They said that no, we should construct national Ukrainian state. They even proclaimed Ukraine for Ukrainians. But the majority of population of Ukraine, they are in favor of civilized, civil, modern state, and I think that new constitution will fix that national concord in favor of our future generations, in favor of peace and cooperation of all nations in my country. Ukraine was able to produce several very important initiatives. The biggest initiative proposed by new Ukrainian state was proposal for Ukraine to be non-nuclear, non-bloc, and permanently neutral country. Here you have a very special example and case. Could you imagine a new state weak because of economic crisis, weak because its state structures are not yet, let's say, fulfilled in their formation. At the same time, this country is the third nuclear power in the world. And somebody could ask me and ask my people, why you are trying to disarm yourself? Why you are trying to be weaker than you are? Why you are trying to dance this strange nuclear striptease? We respect power, we respect force. If you are weaker, you could be put aside from the streamline of historic development. Nevertheless, our national experience and our national doctrine dictate us to be non-nuclear country, to be permanently neutral country, and to be non-bloc country. The first supporting argumentation for that is we suffered too much from Chernobyl, from nuclearization of our country. We have too much nuclear atomic power station in Ukraine, more than 40 old-type reactors, and we export 39% of electric energy produced on that reactors. We understand that the real consequences of Chernobyl drama are of historic meaning. We understand that the real power and a real guarantee for national security are something different than nuclear weapon. We understand that our first priority and national goal and imperative is to develop our economy and to raise the living standard of our people. And over-militarization of national economy will never produce better living standard. We understand that the 21st century will be the century of cooperation. That's why we are ready to destroy all our nuclear weapons. But we are not so naive. We are not so green in sense of new statehood. That's why we request two things. First, international guarantees for our national security, and second, Ukraine to be integrated into European and world structures. I think that policy is clear, is honest, and it is acceptable. From the organizational and technical point of view, we insist that all nuclear strategic weapons should be destroyed on our territory. Nobody has the moral right to take them from Ukraine and to become stronger on account of Ukraine. We stay in favor of good relations with our neighbors and, first of all, with Russia. My government worked hard to improve those relations with Russia. From our side, we have no territorial, no economic, no political pretensions to Russia or to any other countries. And the only problem we have, a big problem we have in interrelations with Russia is Ukraine should be recognized and treated as fully independent country. That's all. If so, we could resolve all other problems: economic, military, political problems, environmental problems, humanitarian problems, and so on and so on. And after some tensions and difficulties, now we have the chance to say that Dagome's conference on the level of two presidents and Crimean conference, which took place this year, they produced something very promising. The biggest problem, sharpest problem of Black Sea Fleet was resolved in very civilized way. And now we could start to discuss the problem of economic cooperation. Economic cooperation, which is very important for both countries, for Ukraine and for Russia. Then, in economic field, we are an organic partners. We are interdependent. We were developed together for centuries. And our policy is very clear. Ukraine is independent country. Ukraine should have its own national currency, say hryvnia. Ukraine should have its own national market. Ukraine should have its own economic space, and Ukraine should obtain full economic sovereignty. No one attempt of so-called integration within the system of commonwealths of independent state, no attempt to create some new artificial structure for domination, say economic court or economic coordination committee, or new economic bank as it was proposed in Bishkek several days ago, no one of that proposal is acceptable for Ukraine. And Ukraine was clear and open and honest rejecting that. We are on the side of bilateral relations and bilateral cooperation. The destiny of commonwealths of independent state depends very much on the, say, behavior of one country, which is the real obstacle on the mutually beneficial cooperation. You know very well that up to this moment we have problem of debt. The former Soviet Union accumulated the debt on the level of 70 to 80 billion US dollars. At the same time, the former Soviet Union had accumulated actives abroad on the level about 80 billion US dollars. And the Ukrainian policy and position was absolutely clear. We said we are ready to take our responsibility for about 17% of the former Soviet Union debts. At the same time, we claim about 17% of the former Soviet Union actives and ownership and property abroad. Unfortunately, we met with very negative, allergic reaction. One country said, no, I am only successor of the former Soviet Union. I only have the privilege to repay the former Soviet Union debts and to obtain all actives. Ukraine would never agree with that. We have a full moral right to obtain the part of the golden fund of the former Soviet Union, and all former Soviet Union, a part of the former Soviet Union treasury. That is from political side. Now let's discuss a little bit economy. Very many colleagues in this country on governmental level and in professional organizations, they say that Ukraine is very slow with its radical economic reforms. And I should agree with that. We are a little bit late. If we started our radical economic reforms 2 years ago, or even 1 year ago, immediately after declaration of full independence, we would suffer less. You know, the statements of feelings of anti-Semitism in Ukraine, those are some rudiments and heavy inertia of past. We have no anti-Semitism in Ukraine now, and we have all components necessary to ensure that principle. First of all, Ukraine is open country now. There is no regime of, let's say, of blockading people who wish to immigrate. The Jewish minority in my country is about 500,000 now, and we had more than 2 million. Now I'm sure that in 5 or in maybe 7 years we will have re-immigrants of Jewish origin. We open Jewish schools. We opened Jewish synagogues, and we established very many associations of Jewish culture and history, and we do that by purpose. For example, one group of Jewish citizens of the United States of America asked me to help when they started their project, which was this very nice title, Roads to Roots. And we helped them. They visited very many small towns in western part of Ukraine and southwestern part of Ukraine, and they were very happy. They developed very interesting programs of cooperation. Economic cooperation, Ukraine-Israeli economic cooperation is very important here, and political cooperation. The interrelations of two countries are very favorable, very good now. We established Ukrainian embassy in Israel, and the first Ukrainian ambassador there is well-known Dr. Yuri, you know, he was Sherbak, Yuri Sherbak, not to say Brychak, because Brychak is another person. Yuri Sherbak was Minister for Environment. He was a chairman of Green Party. He was a chairman of Green Movement in Ukraine. He was a deputy of Ukrainian Parliament and all Union Parliament. And my president has decided to send him the first ambassador to Israel, underlining the importance of that country. I think that the perspectives for that cooperation is very good. Again, I should balance my statement, saying that there are some feelings of anti-Ukrainian feelings in Israel. And we ask why. They say that, well, during the Bogdan Khmelnytsky period, there was a bad period, and then, but Ukraine is not guilty because Ukraine had no power to stop that bad things during the Tsarist Russia or civil war or something like that. Now we open new page, and the Jewish community is initiating one more initiative. They feel that Ukraine could be very important mediator in Israeli-Arab conflict, and people in Kyiv are thinking now what Ukraine could contribute to that. Ukraine, which is a rather difficult situation, is ready to be very important and very active partner for that long-term conflict. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, it's certainly very exciting to think of a economically developing and stable Ukraine in that extraordinarily important part of Europe, and it presents a picture so very different from the one that we've lived with for the last 50 years, and I think all of us even rejoice in the prospect of the kind of cooperation which you've spoken to tonight, and we thank you for your time, for your good spirit, and for informing us so well. Thank you.